All right, well, let's keep this energy going, and let's go right into our next session, which is our panel. Our panel traditionally follows our keynote, so hopefully you all are excited for it. We are doing RFID Comes of Age. So for those of you who have questions about the technology, where it's going, where it's been, and how you can use it in your business, listen up and please have your questions ready. I recommend kind of jotting things down along the way if you can. But these guys are here for you, so take advantage of the time. And I'm happy to introduce our moderator here. Tom O'Boyle is our director of RFID at Barcoding Inc. And I would say one of the best minds in the business. So I'm very biased, of course, because I'm from Barcoding. But thank you all panelists. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Jody. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. So I am Tom O'Boyle, and I'm the director of RFID here at Barcoding. And my group really leads the implementations of RFID systems for our customers. I've been doing this for quite a while. In fact, I've probably been doing it before RFID was an industry, which makes me ancient. But what I really want to do today is really take advantage of the people we have on stage here and really listen to their insights and bring that to us as users and consumers of RFID systems so that we can deploy them properly and obviously get the most out of them. So with that, what I'd like to do is really introduce some of our panelists. So right next to me is Carrie Angelico, and Carrie is the Senior Business Development Manager at Zebra Technologies. She is responsible for evaluation and management of new strategic RFID business opportunities throughout vertical markets in North America. So Carrie's tenure began in mobile computing product management at Symbol Technologies, and she actually worked in the RFID organization starting in 2004 with the acquisition of Matrix, which is a company that Symbol had purchased at that time. So since that time, she's really been recruiting and guiding business customers and end users on their development and adoption of UHF RFID technology. Welcome, Carrie. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Next to Carrie is PV Subramanian, and PV is actually the founder and CEO of Visible Incorporated. And Visible is a startup organization that is developing enterprise asset awareness applications. And he's really inspired by the technology that's being used in the cell phone and smartphone industry, right? So PV comes to us with a little bit of background. And his background includes 10 years of enterprise space as a product manager with the RFID division at Symbol Technologies, which is now part of Zebra. During his time, he's worked on large distributed RFID deployments with Fortune 100 companies as well as small businesses. And PV believes enterprises are really looking for small, simplistic experiences that they're used to now that the world of Uber, Amazon, and Nest has really evolved, right? So he's trying to bring that type of thought process and leadership to the industry. And next to PV is McLeod. McLeod Williamson is the RFID Business Development Manager at R.R. Donnelley. And he is responsible for development and strategic planning for R.R. Donnelley's Printed Electronics Division. His responsibilities include setting product direction, discovering and managing RFID opportunities. So before R.R. Donnelley, McLeod held positions at Zebra Technologies, Manhattan Associates, and Printronix Corporation. Again, PV McLeod, welcome.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you, Tom.
To kind of get started, this panel is about how RFID is coming or has come of age. So to understand how it's come of age, and it's kind of as Jerry has mentioned, you got to know where you came from, right? And one of the things that we do know is that RFID has really been around for almost 12 years now in the data collection world. And what I mean by that is we became aware that RFID was even an option to us around 2003 timeframe. Before that, in fact, I have even done some implementations back in the 90s, right? So the technology had been there, but it had never been in a position that anybody really wanted to use it enterprise-wide. But in 2003, that kind of changed. We had some large retailers, the Department of Defense, and a few other organizations trying to push the technology forward. And in doing so, they were trying to grapple with some of the things that we all have now, I think, transversed over. And that is some of the raw technology issues as well as some of the standardization. So in 2003, everything was focused on supply chain processes. It was focused on how does the technology work. It was focused on trying to track boxes and pallets as they moved from one place to another. It was great. It was the proper thing to do to get started, but in all real reality, we lacked one major thing at that time. We had no standardization. In fact, we had multiple competing, what would evolve into a standard, multiple competing protocols to try and utilize RFID. So there was protocols that the tags and the readers would use to be able to talk to each other. What happened was in mid-2000s, we saw that protocol come to a standard. ISO group stepped in. We got protocols which allowed us to do what? Allowed us trading partners to actually start using the technology and not worrying about if I take these tags and put them on my boxes, will your readers be able to read them? That really started to tick the movement and get the industry moving along. What it really meant is by 2008, we had actually consumed and used completely through the first 5 years 1 billion tags. Now, in the world of consumer goods, that's not a lot of tags. So for 5 years running, we totaled up, we finally hit the 1 billion mark. And what really drove that was that standardization. You fast forward 10 years after that, here we are in 2015, and it's interesting because what we see here is a little different. So now in 2014, last year, in 1 year alone, we had 4.5 billion passive UHF RFID tags in use. In 1 year, we actually had 4.5 times more than what we had done in the first 5 years. And the annual growth rate by the industry analysts is pegged somewhere between 35 and 40%. So what that means is in 2015, the total industry is expected to be $10 billion. It's expected to be $35 billion by 2020. Right? So 5 more years from now, it's continuing to grow. What's driving that growth rate in how it's being used is really important to us so that we can spread that word to take advantage of it. It's coming, it's here, and that's where we're going to kind of dive in. So with that, I'm going to actually ask the first question. We actually have some questions lined up. I was going to throw some curveballs at everybody and mix up the questions so that they didn't know what was coming, but no, I won't do that. So Carrie, I'm going to ask you the first question. What are the trends and the use cases that you're seeing that really cause RFID to be called, that it's at the right stage and it's mature?
Okay, thank you, Tom, and thanks everyone. I'm happy to be here. It's nice to see such a big crowd. You know, we're seeing that the standards were really important in having the standards available, but closed loop applications are really what has helped to take off, for RFID to take off, and the different form factors of readers that are available today, lower cost of readers. So we're seeing RFID really taking off in manufacturing, in not only the warehouse space, as you said, throughout the supply chain, but also moving into other areas like healthcare and even hospitality today. So, you know, the form factors are different. There are devices that are application specific, really to help have the right device for the use case, and I think that's really come a long way.
Great. So when you talk about use cases, what are if you were to look at those industries, what are the primary use cases that are driving most of the adoption today?
Inventory, of course, having so many different items that you need to read, being able to read them much faster, having greater productivity, efficiencies, and then asset tracking throughout any business, needing to read your assets for Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, just so that you know what you have. And then we're finding that companies that have deployed RFID thought inventory and asset tracking was really what they were interested in, but they're finding that they're collecting such great data. So they're really finding that they're learning about trends and things like that.
Great, great. So PV, when you think in terms of the technology as it's being applied, how have customers' expectations changed throughout this process? I mean, we've really gone 12 years, right, in the industry.
Yeah. Thank you everybody for being here. It's a beautiful day outside, and you guys are all inside, so thank you. So speaking of trends, I remember one of the earliest RFID journal conventions was here in Baltimore, and the most popular question during that convention was, so what's your read range, right? And that continued for a few years, and it told me a couple of things. It told me that the point of view that our visitors to our trade shows were taking, was technology driven. They were interested in the technology. They were still trying to find, an appropriate application to sort of wrap it around. And they were interested in what we call speeds and feeds, right? And that's usually great for an early stage technology, but it doesn't bode well if you stay in that mode for a very long time. Thankfully, a few years later, the question turned to, that's too far. How can I control RFID to be within a 2 or 3 feet? Because now they're thinking in terms of how do I apply this, and what are the problems of, what are the natural behavior of the technology versus, how do I see it in my specific application? So I think there's been a lot of maturity among our users. And as Carrie pointed out, again, in the early days, I think everybody was trying to boil the ocean. The goal was that, we're going to have source tagging, right? Tags are going to be put on everything in China, and they're going to just permeate the supply chain. We're going to have open loop systems where, with EPC IDs, multiple companies would be able to leverage the same tag. Those things haven't really been successful, and I think, I call that the attempt to do too much too soon. As soon as we shifted our attentions to closed loop systems, solving point problems, even if it means just one location or one small business, one medium business, that's fine. I think a lot of the success that we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years has really been due to, hundreds of thousands of small RFID applications, and not because of, the big 5 or the big 10 doing very large deployments. You can go on for only so long until you get to use a political term, to get to until you need a grassroots movement. And I think we have that now. Of course, I'm sure we'll talk later in the discussion today about what there've been some completely disruptive and new trends in the last 5-6 years that have come a few years after RFID took over, and I think those are going to have a significant influence on what comes after.
Great, great. So McLeod, how have products actually evolved with that maturation?
So I think PV had a great point, and it's a little bit of a nuance there, but in a new technology, when people ask what's your read range, they're saying what's the maximum read range this technology can do, and that's a question that says, I'm trying to figure this technology out, I don't trust it, is it really going to be good enough? When that question shifts to it's too long, that means someone's saying, I've got a use case in mind. I'm thinking about how to use the technology, how do we get it down to what I want it to do, as opposed to what is this thing and what can it do, right? And so that was a great shift that we've seen, even if it's a nuanced shift. But as the products have changed, again, it does go back to that standardization that came with EPC Gen 2, right? But it allows us to have products that are very specific for different applications. You don't have 3 options, and you can have anything you want with RFID as long as it's one of these 3 options, right? So readers are very specific. Carrie mentioned that. We've got readers that do very specific things. The antennas have certain patterns, and so they're, am I watching a doorway? I've got a specific one for that. Is it a pad reader? Is it watching a portal? Like, there are a lot of different things that readers do specifically now, and in the same way, tags are that way too. You've got tags for specific purposes, and so when you're looking at a use case, you're probably going to have a flavor of RFID or versions of tags and readers that are specifically for those, and that really allows you to move forward without trying to put, a round peg in a square hole.
And one other thing, I think that businesses have found that, when they think about what their problems, what their issues are that they have, and they attack one issue at a time rather than trying to go and deploy, sort of like that, trying to boil the ocean within their own facility, they could try to do too much. And really, they want to prove out each use case, and we're seeing that that's happening, and then they're moving on to others very successfully.
Right. And I do remember we had our choice of 2 antennas at the beginning of time. So if it didn't work with those 2 antennas, it didn't work, right? So it was a little different. So PV, how have business models really evolved based upon that? So you see that this industry, we've had this maturity, we've got new products out there. It sounds like we're now not trying to tell people how the technology works as much as we're trying to actually really deploy it effectively, right?
Right, yeah. So, in the last 5 years, we've had the smartphone revolution come upon us. And it's not at all, it's commonplace now for enterprises, big and small, to try and solve their technology problems by using hosted applications, right? Whether it's it's a hosted packaged application from somebody else, or if it's a homegrown application, you host it on some place like App Engine or Amazon Web Server. The models that are prevalent today across the industry, both on the consumer side as well as on the enterprise side, tend to favor pay-per-use and tend to favor dollars for problems. And I think that's a big change from 10 years ago, it used to be dollars for hardware, or dollars for hardware and software and services. I think the argument is not so much about whether the amount of dollars have increased or decreased. I think what customers are prepared to deploy it for has changed. And that shift is, solve my problem and I'll pay for it, as opposed to I'll pay for buying a whole lot of hardware from you. I think the best solutions are the ones which solve important problems with no regard to how much infrastructure is put in, right? It might be one reader, it might be 1,000 readers. I think the one reader solution is probably better because it solves the problem. And then, you have a certain expectation of it that has changed now. The other thing that has happened is, about, when the iPhone first came out, I remember people would jokingly ask, when we were doing pretty tough, challenging RFID deployments, they would jokingly ask, oh, I wish there were an app for that, right? And that was really a reflection of, gosh, antenna cables are really hard to bend, and, mounting things is, it takes a lot of labor, and I wish all that would go away, and, I just have it all on an app. In the last couple of years, when people ask that same question, they're not joking anymore. They really expect that immediacy and that simplicity that they've come to expect in every other aspect of their lives, right? I mean, you don't stop thinking after 5 p.m., and everything that you do after 5 p.m. tends to influence what your expectations are the next day. And, we're seeing that everywhere in the enterprise. People want it quick, people want the problem solved, people want immediacy, and they don't want to have a long discussion about how many models of antennas are available. So, and I think we really need to address that as an industry.
We did one aside on that. We actually had a customer who called us up and said, we want Facebook for our bins.
There you go.
And our sales rep was a little confused at the time. He wasn't sure what they really meant, but to your point, that's what they want, and they weren't kidding. That's exactly what they want.
That's the Internet of Things.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Very good. So Carrie, what industries are really leading the way with this maturity?
So, sorry, as I mentioned earlier, really we're seeing manufacturing, work in process, asset tracking, anything with shipping, receiving, transportation and logistics, and healthcare is huge. That's really our fastest growing market, I think. Anything that has a lot of parts, SKUs, retail, of course, is the leader in first deploying RFID, and they're really the ones that are out talking about it a lot. So they've helped move this along tremendously, which is great. We need more companies that'll be talking about their deployments. But that's where we're seeing it, mainly throughout the supply chain, but definitely into other markets like healthcare, education, even hospitality. You see Disney using bands and ski resorts that are using RFID tags to have their customers be read at the gates. So it's interesting. I think the sky's the limit. It's really what people can think of, and they're coming up with very, very interesting use cases for RFID.
Great. So let's dive a little bit more into more of the technology side and how that's evolved. So one of the things that has really, I think, transpired in the industry is that people realize that RFID wasn't the thing. It's not always going to be only RFID. We're going to start deploying RFID with other technologies in a hybrid approach to try and really solve the problem. So it's not, I'm going to RFID everything in my warehouse. It's probably going to be, I'm going to put RFID tags on, I'm going to scan them in certain spots with a barcode scanner, and I'm going to read them with an RFID reader in other areas, right? So what we find is there's this hybrid approach to things. So, you know, I'll kind of start with McLeod. So McLeod, how have you seen RFID kind of blend in together with some of these other technologies?
Yeah, and I think it comes with not only the maturity of the technology, but also just an understanding of it, right? So you mentioned when we first started having conversations with RFID, people said, I'm going to tag everything, I'm going to flip a switch, I'm going to see everything I've got and see it move all the time. Like, okay, but yeah, that'd be great, but do you really need that? Is that really going to help you? It'd be really cool. So you kind of boiled that conversation down to where do you really lack the visibility that you need to make the decisions, and what is going to help you get that visibility, right? If it's RFID, that's great, but if it's barcodes, sure, we can do that. Maybe it's on a greater campus, like outside, maybe GPS is the right thing to use. So I think that as we all know the technology a little bit better, we're a little more used to it, we're understanding that it has its place, and it's not going to kill the barcode, which you know, early on people would talk about how RFID is the next great barcode and barcodes are going to go away. That's just not going to happen, right? And you know, it's not a Betamax versus VHS conversation. That was the Class 0 versus Class 1 conversation a while back. So they're going to coexist, and you're going to find the right place where this is the technology for this time, and maybe down the line, a barcode's right. You know, if you think about the pharmaceutical supply chain, they're going to use serialization, and some of those mandates are coming down, but a lot of times the control is so great that a 2D barcode is fine because they're going to know exactly where it's going to be. They're going to know the orientation. It makes sense. Barcodes are there. But once you put those bottles into a case and you can't see them anymore, all of a sudden you don't have line of sight. Maybe RFID makes sense there. So it's just kind of understanding the process, understanding what your needs are and how to get that visibility. And there's going to be a lot of coexistence. There's going to be some overlap, but I think coexistence is what we'll see most.
Sure, great. So PV, when you think about RFID, so most people would think of UHF RFID, which is a long-range passive technology, as the RFID, but really there's other pieces of it. How does that fit in compared to NFC or iBeacon or low-energy Bluetooth in the world of Internet of Things?
Yeah, I think one of the best things that's really happened to RFID, as we've known it for many years, which is passive UHF, is the fact that now there are other technologies under the same umbrella. And you know, technologies like NFC are a lot more popular because you know, more people have them on their phones, and more people have heard of them because there's a lot more discussion around topics that's fueled by consumer technology and the Googles and the Apples of the world. And I think I've at least had a few conversations where people have come to me and said, you know, I want to use NFC, but I want to be able to count all of them in the room at once. And which is a great question because I have the right kind of NFC for you, which is, of course, you know, we would call passive UHF. It's also important, I think, to sort of use the term RFID in a more umbrella sense now. I think that'll benefit all of us. It's all about finding the right wrench for for the problem that you have to solve. I used to call wrenches spanners most of my life, so I still have to think about saying wrench. And now passive UHF and NFC are just two different tools in your tool belt, depending on what you want to do. Now, you wouldn't use UHF for payment technology. I won't say ever, but I can't think of a reason why you would. You wouldn't use NFC for counting how many pairs of jeans you have on a shelf. So they both have benefits. It's a little bit like that old, is RFID better than barcode discussion that we used to have, and there were really only two choices like that, and they're orthogonal to each other. That's and now I think we have multiple technologies that are again potentially orthogonal to each other. BLE is interesting because I'm going to loosely say that it's a popular quote-unquote standards-based sensor technology, as opposed to passive UHF in a sense is the simplest sensor that is out there. And they all are, I think, part of the same continuum. And as long as you identify the problem first and then pick the tool, I think we'll do a good job. in addressing expectations. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's really that problem understanding first, right? First and foremost. So Carrie, RFID is being tied to the Internet of Things all the time. So how is it one of those enablers? What about RFID makes that happen?
So it's a really important component of it. Being able to have visibility of your items, for every item to have an identification so that you can see it wherever it is really how RFID is a piece of the Internet of Things. So you have being able to sense that product, being able to collect data that you can then act upon. So it's a huge component, I think, or one of the many we talked about.
Right.
Yeah, and I think in the future we might just see an interesting situation where IoT sensors, being rich, complicated, slightly more expensive devices, they might need asset tracking of their own, and passive UHF might find legs in that direction as well.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
Perfect. So McLeod, back over to you. So I know that there's new ways of creating these different products. So when you think of Internet of Things products, what are the new ways and how are people looking at that a little differently?
So, Internet of Things is kind of this strange idea that people sometimes think they've got a hold on, and maybe we don't really have a hold on it. But it's interesting you mentioned a Facebook for your bins. Zebra has an Internet of Things platform called Zatar that has often been described, even early on by Zebra folks, as the Facebook for your assets, right? And so, however you can get automated information about those assets on somewhere where multiple systems can see that information and use it, that's really where the rubber meets the road for IoT. But as things, I was thinking about, you talking about the maturation of the technology, and I thought about the chips themselves. So chips obviously go in readers, but a lot of times you talk about chips mostly in RFID tags. And they're certainly getting more and more sensitive. So every iteration, you get the Higgs 3 to the Higgs 4, the Monza 5 to the Monza 6, you're getting really, really big jumps in sensitivity, which is great. But also you get more memory if you want it, but sometimes you get less memory if you don't want it, right? So if a chip is more expensive because you can get 2K memory on it because you're tracking a part in aerospace for the life of it and you need to store an awful lot of data there, then that's great, but everybody doesn't need that. If I'm tracking genes through a supply chain, I only need 96 bits. So can I pay a fraction of the cost of this 2K chip and get one that just says 96 bits? And now, today, the answer is yes. So that helps you get there. But then also, the memory is changing, but the way you manufacture things change. People always ask about the cost, right? So the cost of a reader, the cost of a tag, and it got to the point where the cost was not going to go down even via economies of scale when we get to 6 billion tags in a year if you can't change how it's manufactured, if you can't change the material cost that's there. So companies, including R.R. Donnelley, are looking at ways to do that. So rather than taking aluminum and etching it and having it on a plastic substrate and making an inlay, and I'm sorry, those are probably very strange words, but can we look at maybe printing an antenna? Can we look at maybe printing a circuit for a sensor? Can we print a battery? Are there ways we can do this to make it not only more cost effective, but maybe more customizable, maybe faster, maybe getting to market and do something different more quickly? And as we do that, more things will have that Facebook of their own, and now that's going to just enable IoT.
Yeah. And the cost of tags has always been a question that
Every
comes
time.
up. Part of it is because it is that ongoing consumable that people have to
Right.
cost justify through their application, right?
Right.
So the more we can lower that cost, obviously, the more we can use
Absolutely.
technology. Great. So, PV, I'm going to go back to you. When we think about some of these tags, so McLeod mentioned, being able to print sensors, right? We're now starting to look at RFID tags as not just a tag that holds an identifier, right? But we can start putting other little sensors on it, whether it's movement sensors, whether it's temperature sensor, tip sensors, right? So how is that data, which I guess people call rich data, how is that really being used and applied?
Yeah, so again, if you go back a few years, I think the emphasis that we had was on collecting a lot of data. what do I have in the warehouse? What do I have in the store? What do I have on this shelf? We didn't do a good job then, or I should say the industry, we didn't do a good job of connecting the what do I have to what does it mean and what should I do because I have this data. And really, in today's world, it's all about actions, right? Human beings exist, we do tasks, we do actions, and eventually all the data analysis will be done by, a computer in the cloud, and it'll tell us, do this because I've figured out that's the right thing to do, turn right, and we all turn right. You can only do that, you can have task-oriented data collection only if you have additional sensors associated with your tag. Simply saying that, I have a pair of jeans here, at 9 a.m. and I have a pair of jeans here at 12 and I have a pair of jeans here at 8 o'clock tells you that there was a pair of jeans there the whole day. On the other hand, if you knew that this potentially expensive pair of jeans was handled and picked up, 100 times during the day, that tells you something interesting. That tells you that people like this product, but they aren't buying it. Maybe it's too expensive. And here's an action for you. Try this, I think that's why sensors are important, because they translate data into actions. For instance, there's been, we're going to have a lot of direct-to-home services now. I prefer buying from Amazon even if the product is available at a local Best Buy or Walmart, because I don't have to leave home, and it's going to show up at my doorstep, and it's one place where I can track all my purchases, etc. And I think this concept is going to permeate our lives. So many things are going to become direct to home, which means quality of delivery is going to be important. When was it delivered? Was there any shock in transit? Wouldn't it be great if Amazon sent you an email saying, you're going to have a box at your doorstep, don't even bother opening it, because we know it's broken, right? That can happen, and it'd be great for customer experience to be able to say, we know that before you do, and we are taking corrective action. And that's where the industry wants to go. And again, that's sensors. So I think across the board, to use the umbrella term of RFID, I think we're going to see that it's not just asset ID, it's asset ID plus what happened to the asset, and what should I do now because of that information.
Great. So, McLeod, I'm going to throw this one back over to you. So really, as we started thinking about it, we used to call RFID the crazy science project, right? Is it still a crazy science project? Are we still in that mode?
So, I think that we talked about the conversation changing, right? And so people do trust the technology, and when I give presentations, I always have a slide that says the conversation has changed. And we used to say, well, first, how do you spell RFID, right? And that's what you start with, and then you talk about what it is, what's a reader, what's an antenna, or what's a tag. But now people are coming up and people are thinking, I know what it does, I got this, here's a problem I've got, and I think it's going to work for me in this situation. Talk to me about how this might work, or maybe how we tweak either the technology or tweak my process to solve this problem. So it really is happening that you're having a different discussion. Now I think if you get to the kind of hairy edges of the technology and the new things that are coming, sure, you're still going to have some testing and some piloting to do, but all of that will age as well. Shane mentioned, 41 years since the barcode, but only 16, 17 years maybe since UHF RFID has been. So we're still in the middle of this curve, and it's only going to get better. It's only going to get more mature and easier to use. Back to Jerry with the G's talk about technology being the servant, not the master, right? Yeah. And I'm sure you could talk about how the most elegant solutions that you guys have implemented are where the technology just kind of disappears, and your customers go about their business and do their job, and the technology watches it, and they interact with it on an exception basis, not tied to a handheld or something all the time, right? That's when you know it's working.
Yeah, it is interesting because most of our organizations are really, our customers are really looking for RFID to take out that user intervention, and then our very first implementation, they ask for a screen to verify that it's reading everything. Even though we don't want them to look at the screen, the whole idea of the process was not to look at the screen. And it really comes to confidence, right? Yeah. Once they have the confidence that the system is working right, they stop looking at the screen, they don't need the screen anymore. But it really is that acceptance that it's working properly in the background. So Carrie, as we're looking at these use cases, what are the criteria our customers should be looking at that actually determine a good use case for RFID? What are those basics, right, to look for?
Right, so having thousands of items, hundreds, large number of items that you need to be able to track or have visibility of, they often look the same, but they're very different. So pulling one part as opposed to another could make a big difference within your business on the line with building something. Not having products available because you weren't aware that you didn't have that product. I think seasonal items like in retail where you have an item that you want to make sure you have in your store at a certain time when you're running a special or advertising it. When you don't have it and your customers are looking for it, you're losing sales. I think closed loop, cold chain is another one, sorry.
Yep, yep.
And needing to track items, where they came from, making sure that with sensors, where you can use sensors with UHF RFID too, and knowing that it's been kept at the right temperature and what that temperature was. So if you have a basket of apples that are going to a store and they've been left in a truck that was too hot or something, you get to the store, the retailer can actually see what happened to that product in the meantime and either accept it or decline it, or they can offer it at a discount, something like that. So, so it's important. Those types of things are important.
And those characteristics that Carrie talks about, they span so many different industries, which is why RFID has been something that we've had conversations all across the board. Items that look alike but they're very different, whether that's specimens in a pharmacy or specimens in a lab that have been taken from a hospital, whether it's baggage that's going on an airplane or on a cruise ship. Many bags look alike. Check that it's yours, right? Whether it's cattle going through a cattle auction, and each steer may look exactly the same or very similar. And all of these things might look the same. They are moving, that's important, and then you need to be able to count them quickly and accurately. So those characteristics that she talked about, they can apply to nearly any business process out there.
Yep. Great, great. So PV, is there some simple guidelines that we can use to really assure a successful implementation?
Sure. I've been through my share of unsuccessful ones. So I think I speak some experience. I think one of the most important thing is know who your end user is. Right away, at the beginning of the conversation, know who your end user is and know who's going to pay for it. Those are two things that I think as all of us in the RFID world are engineers, and we try to put that away to the end because we like to talk about antennas and RSSI right away. Don't do that. So, know who's going to pay for it, and knowing and when you start having a conversation about the end user, make sure you understand how is the information being delivered, right? Is it going to go into an Oracle database and it's going to come out as a spreadsheet, once every month? That tells you that, the data is important but not urgent. Or is it going to be in a kiosk, at a retail store where the product is not on the shelf and maybe you can just do an online order right there while you're there? And that's a whole different game because you better make sure the inventory is right because, you don't want to disappoint the customer. So make sure you know who the data is for and how is it going to get delivered and where is it going to get delivered, right? Is it going to get delivered on a spreadsheet or cell phone or kiosk, etc.? I think that framework is extremely important. And once you have that framework right, work backwards from there and then pick the right tool for the problem, whether it's NFC or UHF, whatever it might be. One of my favorite questions that I like asking customers in the early discussions is, tell me why barcodes can't solve this problem for you, right? I'd like the customer to explain to me why they think RFID is necessary and required and why they can't just change operational practices. And that's helpful in a couple of ways. If they they might turn around and think about it and say, you're right, we don't need RFID here. That's great, saves us all a lot of time, right? You go and, you can go fix your problem. On the other hand, if they give you a convincing explanation for why, that really tells you what's important for the customer, right? You change the conversation from I'd like RFID to I'd like to solve this problem this quickly and deliver this information to so-and-so person. So I mean, so my recommendation is in terms of, how do you approach the opportunity? I say approach it from, use case, approach it from who's going to pay for it, and then, technology is mature, technology is stable. RFID technology today is, doesn't merit a lot of discussion in a good way because it works, right? As long as you don't put it in the wrong place.
And I think that I'm going to look at it in a different perspective. From years of being involved in this, working with someone that's experienced is important, like yourself that's been in the business for so long. You have all those lessons learned, right? You're not going to be wasting time because you're not familiar with all the different use cases out there and what the capabilities are. You certainly wouldn't be going in and saying, I have this device I want to sell you. You're going to look at the problem and know what you need to solve, what the problem is that you need to solve, and then choose from your toolkit what's going to work best. And I think that's when we've seen it successfully deployed. But a lot of times, we've seen customers even think that, they can just go and purchase a reader and do it themselves. And there is some experience needed, I think. As much as it's easy, you can take a handheld out of the box, I think understanding that data is so important and having the right software to really make it a successful deployment.
Yeah, I should highlight software. At the end of the day, every hardware solution is about software. And if you get the software right, that's what it takes to make the hardware disappear into the walls. The other day I was listening to an interview on the radio, and the CEO of Domino's said Domino's is a software company. For a second I was surprised to hear that, but I believe it. And that's true, I think, across the board. I think if you get the software right, everything else works. If you get the software wrong, it doesn't matter how good your rest of your technology is.
It really is how the customer is consuming and using the data that's coming out of it. Right.
Yeah.
Great. So, kind of shifting a little bit, let's think about the future, right? So we've been talking about a little bit of the past, how we've been doing things today, and what to look for. And then, from a future perspective, I think we all have kind of our view of what it's going to look like in 5 years. So I'm going to kind of start with McLeod and work this way. So McLeod, what do you think the future is going to look like in 5 years in RFID?
So we're all going to have our fourth house.
Nice, awesome.
So we talked about the way the technology is getting very specific for products, right? And we talked about different ways of producing chips and producing antennas. And I think you're going to see the technology become much more integrated than it is today. So today it's still very much not a disruptive process. It certainly was years ago, but it's an additive process, right? So I've got an asset. I have to add this RFID tag to it. I think that in the near future, we're going to see that tag embedded into that product from the get-go. And you've seen it with barcodes, right? If you go find a product in a store today, there's not a barcode label on that product. The barcode is built into the product or the product's packaging. And so, now that we're able to print antennas, we can print them onto the packaging, and maybe we can add a chip in an automated way when we need to. So I think we're going to see RFID look a little bit different, but kind of disappear into the assets and the packages and the products that we see. And I think that's going to enable a lot more use of it as well.
Great. PV, your thoughts?
Sure. So let's think about the big trends that we anticipate in the next 5 years or so. So you have, today bandwidth is almost free, right? Computing power is almost free. It's amazing, how much you can get done on AWS and App Engine and Azure for very little money. Analytics has become extremely important. Every organization is data-driven. So these three trends are just going to accelerate. They're going to continue. At the same time, the one thing that has become really important and will remain pretty difficult is collecting data, right? All the rest of it, the cheap bandwidth, the computing, the analytics, is all only as good as the data that it's based on. And I think one of the drivers for RFID, and I'm using the umbrella term here, is this desire to collect data for purposes of what big data analytics, right? That's different from some of these point problems that we are. So I think that'll start driving some interesting business models. I mean, I can't put my finger on it just yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if in the next few years we find that, a company like Google or pick another name, is actually, installing the hardware and providing the tags. In return for it, they'll take your data and you lose your privacy, but that's been happening anyway. So there might be different business models in order to sort of feed the cloud. So I think that's going to be a big trend. On the RFID side, I think multimodal is inevitable, right? If different applications are going to demand different, there's going to be a value in having both multimodal readers, multimodal tags across the board. We obviously cannot, people are going to have more computing on their bodies, right? A lot of us have 2 phones and watches, which means that, actions can be delivered to employees. That's going to happen in the enterprise. Google's now come out with the enterprise Google Glass, and that's their focus. So I think we're going to, with all these devices on our bodies, we are really hungry now for actions, right? What do I do? I'm looking at my watch and it's not telling me anything. And I think that things like that is going to drive RFID, because you need data. Data goes to cloud. Cloud tells the watch, go pick up that toad and you go do it, right? So at the end of the day, we are reduced to automatons. That's good, I guess. Yeah.
Right. Carrie, your thoughts?
And, I think that everybody always wants that flip a switch and we can see everything that we have. We're not there yet, but I think in 5 years we will definitely be there. And I think the more source tagging that's done will help that move along quickly. It'll become ubiquitous at some point. I don't know that it'll happen in 5 years, but today we're all buying things from a retail store that have tags on them. We don't even know that. Most times we can walk into a store with a handheld and read thousands of tags in a store where they tell us they don't have RFID.
That's how Carrie gets the good deals.
And we surprise them by saying, yes, you do. Look at how you could be taking advantage of this yourself. So the more source tagging that's done, the more companies can take advantage of tracking those items. And then, yes, you'll be able to flip a switch because the technology is moving quickly, and you'll be able to see everything that you have at one time.
Just from my perspective on that, from a future standpoint, I do see, right now we spend a lot of time engineering these different read zones to get the proper data that we're looking for. I think that's going to be easier over time, right? Being able to control what's the difference between a raw read event and a valid read event is important to us. So I think that's going to get easier and better, and when that happens, of course, that lowers the cost of the entry into technology, right? So that's good. All right, well, with that, I'm going to kind of wrap up. I think our time is probably there. A couple final comments from us. I do believe that RFID has really become of age, right? It is at a point that we can use it and grasp the technology and deploy it in the proper setting for the proper customer set. So let's make sure that we're looking at that. I love the answer PV gave about asking the question, why can't a barcode do what you're asking to do? Here at Barcoding, because quite frankly, we can do any of the technologies. If the answer is RFID is in the right mix, it's not a bad answer to us, right? So I think that's appropriate to really look at your use case, try and look at what all the different technology options are, and RFID might be the right option for you, and if it is, let's deploy it accordingly. And then think in terms of hybrid. It's not all RFID, it's not all barcoding, it's a blended mixture of different sensors, technology, to meet the use case to get your return on your investment. It's really the key. So with that, should we open the floor to questions? Do we have time, Jody?
I think if you guys are okay with this, we'll take questions offline.
Okay, take questions offline. One last thing. First of all, thank you, panelists, for being here. Carrie, PV, McLeod, thank you for your insights. This session has actually been recorded, and it will be on the Supply Chain Geek Network, the brand new site that Jody is working on. So if you want to go up there, you can grab this session and review it later on. And thank you again for everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys very much.